All right, welcome back. Let's go over these answers. All right, so the top one, we have basically just count how many beats there are and divide that by the amount of time, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 beats. 12 beats happening in 10 seconds. And then you just want to convert that to beats per minute. So we have 60 seconds per minute, and that gives us 72 beats per minute. Okay. I know sometimes I get questions about, well, what if you have a different estimate for how many beats there are per amount of time? That's totally fine too. There's going to be some leeway in there in terms of like if I were to grade a question like this. There would be some window of, some window for error there. Okay. Okay, moving on to the second one. So what's abnormal about this ECG? So hopefully you all figured out, it takes a little bit of looking at, but hopefully you figured out these are our P waves. So I'm going to circle our P waves in green, like these little ones. Okay. And then we've got, I'm gonna do our QRS complexes. Those are pretty easy to recognize in yellow. And then I will do blue for our T waves. Okay, so now that I've written all over it, so you can see that we have more P waves than there are QRS complexes or T waves, right? So, well, first of all, that kind of answers that first question, like what's abnormal? We're not getting a full EKG trace every time. Sometimes we're just getting a P wave. So what the heart is doing, basically, whenever we have a P wave, that's going to signal atrial contraction. When we have our QRS complex and T wave, we're going to have ventricular contraction and relaxation. So what's happening is we're just not getting the ventricles contracting every time that the atria contract. Okay. So basically, this is indicative of like what's called a heart block, where the signal isn't making it through the AV node all the time. So it's going through the atria and it kind of gets stuck at the AV node. Like sometimes it makes it through, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, and I don't expect you to really know that. But as long as you can kind of recognize the abnormalities in the EKG trace.
Professor, what does that mean for the blood flow if
right,
the atria is contracting?
Yeah, that's kind of problematic, right? So you have basically like you're not contracting your ventricles as much as you should be. So you have like really large stroke volume or really large end diastolic volume. And probably like, I'm not a cardiologist, so I can't say, but like, I imagine that would like place an undue strain on the ventricles. Yeah. Okay, so now that you've had a chance to, oh, sorry, someone.
It's Eliza. It seemed like, I guess the P and the T in the slides we had last night looked the same, whereas here they look slightly different. Which one's more
typical? Well, I honestly like neither one. I mean, these are kind of, they're cartoons. So like an actual EKG trace is going to look a little bit different. Basically, the kind of, you can tell by the timing, like relative to the QRS complex. So hopefully, like if you're looking at a trace, you can see at least one full EKG trace with the P wave, QRS, and T wave. And then you can use that as like your reference point for what your T waves are going to look like later on in that trace, or your P waves. Yeah.
Thank you for explaining, because I was like, They're not the same. Too literal.
Yeah.
I have a question really quick.
Yeah.
So if we're not getting ventricular contractions, then why is the height of the QRS complex relatively the same? Because I was
Right.
thinking it was like the AV valves opening and closing again, because you are seeing that P wave.
Right. So can someone else answer that question? Does anyone an idea of what the answer to that question might be? No? Okay, so I just want to remind you that the EKG trace is just showing the electrical signals for the contractions, right? So the heart is not going to, I don't think there's not really any like feedback or anything that says like, oh, I see it. No, but it's still okay. Yeah, it's just the electrical activity. It doesn't really show the strength of the contraction. It just shows the signal, just that initial electrical signal and the like action potential that happens in the contractile cells before they contract. But that signal is going to be the same size, and the contraction will be different. Does that make sense?
It's also, I think, like because action potentials are all or nothing, right? So in the cases that the depolarization signal does spread to the ventricles, it'll still release the same type of like action potential, no matter if the atria are depolarizing more or not.
Right.
Right.
Is it also related to the fact that the QRS is that sum of 3? So it's always going to be the additive summation? It says, well, my notes say the QRS complex is made up of Q, R, and S waves together. So that's what I'm thinking. Why I'm thinking.
Yeah, I don't think it's really related to that. I mean, that is true what you just said, but like essentially like all the signals are basically going to be the same size. Like the electrical signals through the heart are not going to change depending on how much blood is in the heart and how hard the heart is pumping and so on. So, okay, so let's do, now that we looked at that one, let's spend a little bit of time looking at a few more. So just on this slide, I'm going to have you all break out into your breakout groups and kind of discuss what you think is going on with these 3 traces here. Okay, so off we go. Sorry, Senya. Okay, got you.
Can you do that for me one more time? I don't know what happened.
Oh,
I love this one.
actually I can't. You're like, you've already been here. I'll
I'll try here. I can leave and come back.
Yeah, sure.
Or wait, let me see if I can. Yeah, I'll leave and come back. Give me 2 seconds. That was weird. Or actually, wait.
Or I could move you to a different room and then move you to your room. Oh, you got it. Okay. Okay, everybody, let's go over these. Now, first off, I just want to say, like, again, I don't expect you to like really be able to know exactly what's going on, but at least hopefully you can tell which waves are missing or if things like that. So let's just let's get started, right? So with the first one, you have your waves labeled for you, so that's nice. So a couple of groups brought up the fact that there's no T waves, and I don't really know what to say about that. I mean, I imagine that there must be, I mean, the ventricles must be repolarizing, otherwise you wouldn't be able to continue having a heartbeat. So I imagine that the T wave must be like getting lost in there somewhere. Maybe it's like combined here with the QRS complex or something. But kind of the main thing, hopefully, that you noticed is that we have, again, not a one-to-one correspondence between our P waves and our QRS complex, right? So we don't get a QRS complex every time we have a P wave, which means, again, that we have that kind of heart block situation where the atria are contracting, but that signal isn't making it to the ventricles every time. The other thing, I don't know if you notice this, but if you like going back to this graph right here, you can see that when, maybe I should erase. Okay, so that in this graph, when we do have a QRS complex, it is happening at a consistent lag time after the P wave. Whereas down here, you can see that there's a variable time between the P wave and the QRS complex. So like here. So that means that there's like, that the QRS complex isn't happening at the same time after each P wave, which means that basically the atria and the ventricles aren't communicating with each other, okay? So again, I'm telling you this, I'm telling you what's going on, and I know what's going on because I took this out of your book where it like told you what was going on. But I don't necessarily expect you to be able to look at these and know exactly what the problem is. But after having told you that, does that make sense? That's kind of more like what I expect you to get out of this. Yeah, everyone's okay with that? Okay. Second one, we have some waves missing. I'm not sure how many of you were able to determine this, but we have, so these are T waves, and we don't have P waves happening. So do you all see that? I'm not sure if you noticed that when you were looking before. It's a little, again, a little hard to pick out. But if we don't have P waves happening, then that means that the atria aren't, like the atrial cells aren't all contracting together. So this is actually what's happening here is atrial fibrillation. So the individual cells are contracting and they're having their electrical signals, they're all contracting, but since they aren't doing it in a coordinated fashion, they aren't creating that large in unison electrical signal that can be picked up as a P wave. So does that make sense to people? Everyone good with that? Okay. And then moving on to this last one, this one just like looks like a total mess, right? I think a lot of people were just kind of like, what? I have no idea what's going on here. And also, I don't think I would be able to know either, except that I, saw the answers in your book, okay? But so this is a recording of ventricular fibrillation. Take a moment and look at the trace and see if does that make sense to you? Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. You know, it is really hard to tell what's going on, but very clearly, you know, you can't see like very clear QR. Oh, sorry, I drew an action potential. Okay. You know, you don't see any very clear QRS complexes, right? So that means that, again, you don't have that coordinated electrical signal coming from your ventricular cells, making that larger summed signal that you can pick up as a QRS complex, okay? How are people feeling about this? Good, okay. Yeah, so again, you know, I don't expect you to like look at these graphs and like know exactly what's going on, but you might, you know, hopefully you should be able to like tell if there are certain waves missing, or maybe I would do like a matching kind of thing, like which one do you think would be ventricular fibrillation, something like that. Okay.
Professor,
Yes.
would sort of a pathology of the mechanics of the heart ever show up on an EKG? Like if there was like some issue with a valve, would that end up ultimately translating into an EKG, or because it's only tracking that electrical activity, it wouldn't show up?
Yeah, I don't know if a valve problem would show up on an EKG. Definitely like if someone has had a heart attack or something like that, that shows up on an EKG because those heart cells have died, and that like alters the way that the trace looks. I'm not sure about valves. So yeah, that's the best answer I can give you.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so next part. Next exercise, we're gonna review the cardiac cycle, okay? So again, I'm gonna put you into your breakout groups. First thing I want you to do is just review the phases of the cardiac cycle, just kind of go through and remind yourselves what's going on. And then just second thing is just go through these questions, which basically they're just review questions, kind of help you process all of the stages of the cardiac cycle. Okay, let's do that. Okay, welcome back. So let's go over these answers. I think, you know, the cardiac cycle is something that just kind of takes a lot of like just thinking through in your head to kind of get it to all make sense. So first couple questions I think are pretty straightforward. During which parts of the cycle are the atria contracted and relaxed? Basically, the atria are only contracted during atrial systole. So number 2, and then relaxed during the rest of the time. The ventricles are contracted during these 2 phases, isovolumic ventricular contraction and ventricular ejection. Sorry, I don't know how to like move, if I can move that thing, but so it's 3 and 4, and then during the rest of the time. So 1, 2, and 5. Okay, I think those are pretty straightforward for people. The valves are, I think, a little trickier to understand. So the AV valves are shut during basically 3, 4, 5. Okay. What causes them to shut and them to open? Take a moment now to kind of explain a little bit more about valves, because I think people, it's just kind of hard to understand or hard to think of. So per Gustavo's request, I'm going to try to make a drawing. Okay, so the valve, first of all, I guess one thing I didn't explain in the lectures is the valves are one way. So the AV valves kind of open downwards like this, okay? And the semi-lunar valves are one way in the other direction. They open like kind of upwards like this. Okay? And basically, whether the valves are open or closed depends on the pressure on either side of the valve, right? So what you can sort of think of the valves as like, you think of it as doors that open in one direction, right? So you have pressure on one side pushing, like for the AV valves, these arrows are going to try to push those doors closed. These arrows on this side are going to try to push the door in, okay? Then the valve is going to close, and vice versa. If this pressure is larger, then the valve is going to open, okay? And then same with the semi-lunar valves, okay? So the semi-lunar valves will, oops, okay, will open when we have high ventricular pressure, right? So this is the ventricles, and then this is the artery on this side. With the AV valves, we have the atrium on this side and the ventricle on the bottom. Sorry. Okay, so going back to the question, what causes the AV valves to shut? The AV valves are going to shut when the ventricular pressure here is greater than the atrial pressure. And then what causes it to open? That's going to be the opposite. It's going to be when the atrial pressure is larger than the ventricular pressure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Professor, can I ask you something else?
Yeah.
Here on atrial systole, number 2, these
Yes.
black arrows, are they pointing the blood going from the atria, passing through the AV valve?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And
Sorry.
and on drawing number 4, ventricular ejection, we have blood going through the semilunar.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the black arrows indicate the flow of blood.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay. And then question, when are the semilunar valves shut? Basically, the semilunar valves are, I've already told someone this, I don't remember. Basically, they're only open during ventricular ejection. So they're shut during all of the other phases. So that would be 5, 1, 2, 3. Okay. What causes them to shut? Again, looking up here, I know it's like super messy now, but looking up here, it's going to shut when, oh no. It's going to shut when the pressure in the arteries is greater than the pressure in the ventricles. Does everyone see that? And then it's going to open when the opposite is true, when the pressure in the ventricles is greater than the pressure in the artery. Okay.
So just to make sure I'm understanding, so for the semilunar, it's ventricular and arterial pressure. For the AV valves, it's atrial and ventricle pressure.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's move on. I think like we're running out of time, so I'm just not going to go over this part about stroke volume and cardiac output. I do want to just like quickly answer this question because a couple people had this question, like what is initial load? Basically, initial load is the same thing as end diastolic volume. It's just how much blood is there in the heart before the heart contracts. So yeah, that's that's that. And then I had this nice little table that I was going to have you all work on. So I will just describe it to you and then have you can kind of think through it and work on it on your own. But basically, it was just to see like what the effect of each of these factors is on heart rate, stroke volume, and cardiac output. Okay, so is each of these going to increase, decrease, or have no effect on each of these? I'm not sure how, maybe I'll just like post something on the Canvas with the answers, but I do encourage you to kind of think through that on your own. And then that's it. We're now ready to move into our group question, which is a little bit long. It's a little involved. It has you looking actually at that Wiggers diagram that I introduced to you at the very end of the lectures for today. Okay. Any questions before we break out into breakout rooms for the group question? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and do that.